Last night I had a dream we were inseparably entwined.
Good morning. Thanks for coming. There's some footnotes. Firstly, I'm probably the most poop-scared person in my personal life, so I wouldn't really call myself brave. Number two, I'm a bit dilly. This morning I was changing things around, and my main body of work, Soweto, that I wanted to speak about bravery, I landed up leaving it at home, so I'm going to show you on the website. So please believe me, you can buy my book or you can come to my show at WAM next year. The quality is there. It's just not good on the website. And the third thing is that I'm going to speak a little bit about me from a more autobiographical thing around bravery. But all the people that I've encountered since September 93 who I photographed are really the brave ones. Okay, so I think I'll start off with asking all of you, has there ever been a time where you've... Oh, and another thing, I can't just speak about bravery. I have to speak about fear. Have any of you decided, oh, I want to change careers, or I want to go to this specific exotic place on holiday, or I want to do something, and the fear stops you? Yeah? Now, from me working in different countries around the world, going to different places around the world, I've sort of figured it out. It's basically the unknown that you fear, because generally if you do it, then it happens. And while you might think it's brave for me to go to Afghanistan or to go to Iraq or Iran, or once you're there, it's something completely different. And for me, even though I do work for the media on occasions these days, I think that we are fed in the media about the worst of every place and every situation. And therefore, when you think I'm going off to Kabul, you don't know that I'm also going to the embassy, to the Italian embassy to have pizzas at their exotic home in Kabul. You don't know that the foreign correspondents all live in this house and have big parties. You know, you only see the worst of what happens. And I think that it's a perfect topic, bravery, because we live in Johannesburg. Well, I think most of us do. And so when I say I'm fearful in my daily life, it's more about that I think like a Tsotsi. And maybe because I've worked with gangsters and I've worked with different criminals, so you won't find me sitting in my car waiting outside someone's house. They must come and open straight away because I don't want to be hijacked. And I sort of operate, it's cautious. Now, why did I take on the work that I did? And I think that the reason is that in 1993 I started working for the Star newspaper with Ken Oosterbroek, Joao Silva, Kevin Carter used to pop in. And from coming from this middle-class background, suddenly my life completely changed. All of a sudden I was covering the 94 elections, I was based in Ulundi, I was seeing all this death around me. And when I went to visit my friend in Westcliff for tea, and there was a tree that was like crossing her driveway, I thought we were under threat. And that was just a psychological thing because of what I was seeing. So in my personal work, what I chose to do is look at the youth living on the fringe of society. And for 10 years, I worked with gangsters. I worked with a young guy, David Jacoby, from a poor white community in Vrede Park. I met the serial killer, Moses Sithole. But I call my work between darkness and light, because when I met Moses Sithole, you know who he is. He was the most notorious serial killer. He killed 48 women. He said he was a social worker. And he said that he used to go to Park Station, pick up women who were coming in from rural areas, and he would find them a home. But what he used to do is take them in the taxi through, say, we got to take a short route through Cleveland, and he would rape, strangle them to death. But anyway, when I met him, we went to Park Station, and it was just me and him, because I had met him through the Star newspaper, because I wanted for my own project to photograph street children. And the children stole his wallet, and he did nothing. And I said, "You're so generous. You're a kind man. You know, why didn't you do something? And I dropped him back at the garage where he was staying, and 3 days later, the front page picture was Moses Sithole, the most notorious serial killer in South Africa. And I had told him what a good man he is. But that's what working with the gangsters in Westbury. You know, Rosie, one of the gangsters, one of the fast guns, said, Jody, how can you come? You're a small white girl. How can you come into this area just with your jacket? Where's your gun or your bulletproof vest? And it sounds weird, but once you get to know someone, we all have darkness and we all have light. And I think it depends where you come from, on how you respond. In Westbury at the time, if you're a little child, you see your mom and your dad's probably in jail or dead or in gangsterism, and you see people fighting with knives and guns, and that's how you respond. But when I sat with these guys, the fast guns, they were gentlemen. They were very lovely and polite. And so what you see in me as being brave, doing all these things, I'm just accessing something different in the personality of the person. And how did I justify doing the Ebola crisis? I went to Uganda for the New York Times magazine to cover that. I phoned someone from CNN. He survived it. So I thought, let me go. But then I was just a hungry photographer, and the New York Times magazine, woo. But that was stupid bravery. The Democratic Republic of Congo, going to photograph those very, very brave women who are raped by soldiers because they're the one that have to get food. Iraq. How did I justify Iraq? I justified it in terms of bravery by basically saying that, come on, in Joburg we can be hijacked. I was going to Basra, and I was going to photograph the first woman who was training the Iraqi police force. And I thought, I've got 2, 4, 6 guys watching me who get paid £500 a day. I'm safer here than I am in Johannesburg. And these are my ways of seeing myself. Well, where you see the bravery, I see something different. Where I'm not brave is if I'm in a public space and have to photograph. I think the way I am when I'm working is that I create connections and friends, and I like people to collaborate with me, and that's how I've really gained access. So instead of me talking, I want to just show you an extract from my first book, which was over a 10-year period, called Between Dogs and Wolves, Growing Up in South Africa. You will see it's slightly autobiographical because you'll see my family's there as well. And thank you to me and the Volumes for the music.
It was 76, the street blue in ebony mist. I'm treading it swift and running past where Hector got hit. Bullets rang, several kids ran, better not flinch. I catch a glimpse of this bastard running past us with a gas mask, chucking tear gas cans that hit you like anthrax. Carry a brick load of black wrath in my stance. Hit him with the slab, he drops his rifle and flashlight. Walk towards him, is bleeding. My face hardens, grab his gun. As the crowd overlooking yells, take it from him. The place is humming. This mother is gonna pay for something, for chasing and gunning and making martyrs out of youngins. We stare for a while with murder in our eyes. If he's never seen it before, then he heard it in our cries. Drift to a time when we was in a line. My only dad was a prison visit, a bird caged in its prime. Pain ancient as time, like cells aimed at your spine. My soul waiting to find mercy. Wait, but am I worthy? Hate can devour earthly. based in divine birds we chase to define where's we supposed to be. Cause the last days are close to we, eyes wide, close to see, past the smoke, scenery. I drift back to see him bleed. Cocked the rifle, shot him to silence his misery. Crowd dispersed after the gun powder burst. Life escapes him, I'm well alive, but I still got it worse. Got it worse, 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 got it worse. Hey yo, I still got it worse.
76 was not a very good year. We were so caught up with fear. But I've still got it worse. I've still got it worse. I've still got it worse. 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 Ooh, got it worse. Got it worse. Ooh, got it worse. Got it worse. Still got it worse. 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 Oh, still got it worse. Got it worse. Got it worse.
So the next body of work I'm going to show you is, I always have an idea or a concept behind something. I'm not just doing it because I want to show you something. And it was prior to 1994, and as you know, I've worked for international magazines before, and newspapers, mainly magazines, but South Africa is seen in the media always around HIV/AIDS, around gold maybe, around crime, around corruption, etc. And sometimes people don't get the perception of the other side, like my nieces who are 14 that take their bicycles and go cycling and all the other things that we do in South Africa, besides being fearful. And I wanted to create a project leading up to the World Cup that was around shifting the stereotype about, you all know Soweto. How many people have been to Soweto? Everyone. So I wanted to create a project that shifts the stereotype of how Soweto has generally been perceived. And I went to Josie FM and I spoke to one of the young women, and she said to me, you know, Soweto is like Hollywood. Everything is here now. And so I wanted to create how I felt Sowetans viewed Soweto. And I also wanted to bring people closer to being fearful of a township and not always being fed what it is, dangerous or poverty or all those things. So I spent 3 months because we wanted to get a book out. And I drove 7,000 kilometers in a 3-month period. I just drove and drove and drove with 4 students from the market photography workshop, because who had lived in Soweto, because if you all know, it's massive. And I created this body of work, which I'm going to show you now, but unfortunately it is on the website. So I start off with this image, No Fear. Because generally, even if you go to a hospital, and I suppose this is a typical image of what we often see, I think that basically even when you go to a hostel where some people would fear to go in, there is a system. So you have to go to the Nduna, and you have to meet with him, and you have to get permission, and you have to get someone to take you around. And so what people generally fear, because they don't know, it becomes less fearful and is seen as being brave. So I don't want to talk through the images. I'd rather just show them to you. It's a 1-year-old birthday party. It's a big trend in Soweto. This work is presently going to be shown in Soweto as part of Bombay Sapphire, are having a whole thing related to, it's really, if you can get there, it's wonderful. It's not only photography.
But won't they steal your works? No, that's a joke. That's a joke.
And I just wanted to try and show images that maybe had not been seen before of Soweto. It's a pity. Sorry. I just look at the color and I get embarrassed. And there were even for me who traveled, I don't know, I've been working in Soweto since '94, but to meet these guys that are a rock band called Rebirth, and basically their audience are generally white rockers in Cape Town.
Why is that? Is that because there isn't a rock following within the black population?
I don't think so. I mean, if you think like things are shifting, so I don't think rock music was that popular, am I right? Asking the black community here. No, it was a very white man's music. And it still is. I mean, I'm sure the following is specific.
How are they introduced?
I don't know. I think he just loved rock. And I photographed Nati for my next project, which I hope you're all going to come see at the Goodman Gallery in April. He's Nati Lowe. Oh, sorry, that was fast. Yes. This is Zola, the area Zola, which used to be the gangster area. A good wife respects her husband. And this, once we're speaking about bravery and crime, it was a very cute South African story because I wanted to photograph an older couple who are still married. And I saw him on the street and I stopped my car and I said, "Hello, are you still married?" And he said, "Yes."
Not accepting.
Do you think we could go ask your wife, maybe you want to be in my book on Soweto? And he said, "Okay." And I said, "Jump in my car." And he looked at me and he said, "You're not going to hijack me, are you?" I mean, I come from an old-fashioned background, which is film. Both, when I worked for The Star, I had 2 cameras, one with color slide, one with black and white, and we had to come back and process both under deadline. And so I noticed with myself that in general, I try to get the composition totally right, and I try to get my raw file right. Where I know that a lot of the younger generation now are experts in Photoshop. But I do get Tony Mankies in Cape Town with exhibition prints.
So you're still shooting film or have you gone digital?
No, I'm shooting with a very good digital camera, a Nikon D800E. I think that's what it's called. No, sorry, where did we go? Yeah. I thought this was beautiful. Someone had put the HIV/AIDS sign in his grass. And this is...
It's not just anti-erosion.
No, it's too neat. And that's the Backpackers Lodge. Nelson Mandela in his shrine, ready. Hector Peterson. And this is the most beautiful portrait studio I've ever seen. And for me, this was a very significant photograph. I think it speaks a lot about the older and the new generation. And she makes the best chisanyama. And never go to a Sangoma. And every Sangoma I think I've photographed, I've asked them to read my bones. But her top guy said that I was going to have an accident, and I still had 6,000 kilometers to drive in Soweto. So for the first week, I was just going like 10 Ks an hour. And my assistant said, please go faster. And then I thought it was very important also to have different people. So from, that make up Soweto. So a gay couple, the Sangoma, the old and the new. And even though this is a traditional picture you might see, you do have the new housing there. And it's also, from a distance, you might see shacks and think to yourself, what, I'm intimidated to go there. But once you enter, it's people's homes. This is the start of my football section. And then I found the Orlando Pirates and the Kaiser Chiefs supporting house. And then in the Nduna's room, this is what he had on his wall. And unfortunately, this work hasn't yet been exhibited in South Africa as a full body of work. This is in Vilakazi Street in Mandela. You know where Mandela's house is? And it's wonderful. The mom and daughter, she loved snakes when she was little. And went to the snake park and was there. And now they've got, they've got so many snakes in their house. Guarded and, in proper glass containers and that. And they try and educate Sowetans about snakes. This is in a barber shop, a wedding. We can't get away from crime. Because I had a lot of work, I grouped them. So play, crime, like social diseases. And then through there, I work with people that I respect. My Loving Tavern. This is the best dressed man in Soweto. And it was incredible because I saw him once again and I stopped my car and I said, oh, you dress so beautifully. And I said, I'm doing this book. He said, come. And he had jazz filtering through his house and he had like 1,000 pairs of shoes in his bath. And like I did a whole fashion shoot. He had 1 million different outfits. But I don't think he does. I think he just swanks around Soweto. A wedding at Takoza Park. This is, what's the clothing called? I suddenly forgot. But they've got their own clothing brand in Soweto. And yeah, thesis, exactly. Bikers, big in Soweto. This is outside Panyaza. I don't know, I can't remember who he is, but there was a party one night. This is the gospel event they have. Beautiful music, if you like gospel at all, very lovely. And then, of course, you can't leave out church. The hardest place, I'll show you, to get permission was to photograph at the swimming pools. Because if you go, it's the best fun. To Orlando swimming pool, there's a DJ playing music and people are having a drink and they're braais and you're not allowed to drink. And so I think there was fear that I was after this, which I clearly was not. But I eventually got in. Spring cleaning.
So most of this is just happenstance. As you were traveling, stop from
7,000
like those
Ks.
twins.
Yeah, like I said, why don't we stop at this building and go see something? And then, I would be photographing with these twins. I was photographing that young couple with the hair. And then they said, well, come to, here. And then that's how I met. And so I find, even when I was working at the Star between 93 and 96, like if I had free time, I wouldn't want to go to the center of town because I felt fearful and I felt braver to go to Soweto. And the Gogos, like when 5 o'clock came, they used to say, now it's time to leave, and I would leave. But, this was all by just driving around. And then I wanted to show, obviously, this is the new young people with their little garden happening. And finally, it ends with home and dignity and pride. And this is at an old age home. So what was interesting for me is that there was a managing director just prior to the World Cup who got his secretary or assistant to phone me from Britain, because I was on the BBC, and saying, my director's a bit nervous to come to South Africa because he's just seen every single documentary there is about all the terrible things that are going to happen to him when he comes to South Africa, and now you've confused him. So is it really true what you photographed? And I like to say that it's not the full truth, but it is part of the truth. And he did come to South Africa. Okay, now I want to show you, I've got tons, but we haven't got time. So I'm going to speak about Aisha. And she is really about brave. Do you all know who Aisha is? Yeah? And this is the photograph that won me the award.
It's a big deal.
No, you know why? It's not so much about the award. And it wasn't just the award. It was the cover of Time magazine. But because of the cover, I think they must have written about the headline, the photograph, on every blog that exists. I've got loads and loads. And now, how I can introduce myself is not so much about my other work. But if I go to the streets of London and say, well, my friend has to say, she's the one that took the picture of Bibi Aisha, the cover of Time magazine with the woman without the nose. People know the picture. But just back to the behind the scenes of this photograph. Time magazine asked me to go to Afghanistan to do a portrait series of different women living in Kabul. And Erin Baker, who was the writer, basically, she was living there with her Afghan husband, American lady working permanently for Town. And she had met all these different women, and I arrived there. I said, I like working on my own. You don't need to come with. And I worked with Shah, who was a translator, and we drove around to all these different women and photographed them. And it wasn't just the doom and gloom of how Afghan women are treated. I photographed women politicians. I photographed the Oprah Winfrey of Afghanistan. I photographed documentary filmmakers. So it was a series. And then I went to photograph Aisha. And just from a creative perspective, because this is Creative Mornings, that I had huge conflict the way I photographed her, because I thought I had failed. Because I was working for Time, I thought that I needed to create a picture not of power or not showing her in this way, but more of vulnerability. And therefore, I think that everything is between darkness and light, because many people have said to me when they saw the cover, they thought, why is this beautiful woman on the cover of Time magazine? And then they saw her nose. Mm-hmm. So I always reflect on Beauty and the Beast.
How did she feel about it, Aisha?
How did?
She's obviously aware as a subject of that it's hard.
Aisha is now in America. I met her twice in America. She was in Queens, living with Women for Afghan Women, the organization. And then she's now living with an Afghan-American family. I think it's in Maryland. And she's undergoing surgery now for her nose.
Was that subject to all the exposure she got from your pet?
Well, I never believed it, and I never wanted to say it until I read something somewhere that it is. Because I think the reason they allowed us to photograph was that they wanted the visa. They wanted exposure. And I think this just sped it up. Well, suddenly she was in America.
So when you met her, did she used to cover her face? Or was
No, she's super confident.
Wow.
Really, and apparently...
Those eyes there, I mean, those eyes say super confident. You didn't have to extract that out of her.
No, I just asked her. I said, close your eyes, try just for 1 minute, put behind you what happened, and think of your inner beauty and your inner strength. And she opened her eyes, and that's when I took this photograph.
How long did you shoot with her?
About 3 hours.
Is that all?
Yeah. I mean, often I find that when I photograph someone, 3 hours, and then I lose them. That's max. And then, because we're working together, and they just get exhausted. Then.
Did you have fear when you had to take that shot? Because that's for all parties, it's a little unsettling.
I know, but it's like a doctor who works in surgery. Unfortunately, I've seen so much. And often, it's my job as a person to make someone feel comfortable, as if nothing's, hello, how are you? Wow. Her story was that she was given away when she was 14 to settle a dispute within a family, a criminal dispute. So she married at 14, and when you live in Afghanistan in a rural village, you go live with your in-laws. And her in-laws were abusive, her husband was abusive, and so she wanted to run away, which she did. And she ran to her neighbor, but her neighbor handed her in to the police. And in Afghanistan, if you run away from your husband, you go to jail. And then she received amnesty, and her family took her back to the village, and to teach her a lesson, and to teach other women a lesson not to run away from their husband. They took her into a clearing, and her family held her down, and her husband cut off her nose and ears. And then the military, and her ears. And the military found her and looked after her for, I think, 3 months, and then she went to Women for Afghan Women Shelter in Kabul. That's where I photographed her. And this is her with her prosthetic nose.
I prefer without.
Well, the organization had a problem because she used to walk around Queens, and she didn't mind not having a nose, but it was too much for many people around. But now she's getting her prosthetic nose.
So other people who were fearful of her, that she was not fearful of what they might.
No, she's I mean, she's complicated and obviously post-traumatized, but she's a very brave woman. But it's more the trauma of being held down, and imagine having your nose and ears cut off. But luckily, I mean, when I met her, I actually saw her beauty before I saw her nose. I see myself as an untrained psychologist. Because if I go in, you see, if you make your drama around your preconceived ideas, then you are creating the barrier. If you go into something, and that's what bravery is. I think like the best sportsmen, the best documentaries, the best is about just doing it. I mean, if I have to cross like a ridge and I have to jump, without having a purpose, I won't do it. I'll be fearful. But because I need that photograph over there, I will do it. So we create our own fear. A lot of it. Of course, there is, constructive fear. So let's go to something lighter. And it's a different form of bravery. It's where women have stood up and gone against what the media shows women, who will look at Vogue and look at Fair Lady and all the other women magazines and think we all have to be perfect. And I decided to do a project, which is going to be a book next year, called Real Beauty. And I'll show you the images now. Just so you know that the way I worked is I put posters at the university, I went to Eldorado Park, I went to Soweto. I wanted to get a mix of Joburg people because I live here. And everyone stood up for Real Beauty. I asked women I was inspired when I was walking through Old Street Tube Station, and I saw the ad of ordinary women in their underwear for Real Beauty. And then I went from London to Paris, and I met a high-end Vogue model, and she told me all the dark secrets of everyone in the magazines that are not as perfect as we thought. And then I heard a BBC radio interview that spoke about that in South Africa, where voluptuous used to be like more sexy, specifically in the black community. Now more women, black women, are, I wouldn't say many of them, are becoming anorexic and are sort of looking towards the Western ideal of body shape. And it was a collaboration. It was shown at the Goodman Gallery. Everyone received an artist-proof print if they came to the show and picked it up. Some haven't yet done that. And I asked each woman that I wanted to photograph them at their home, but the way they chose to pose was their pose. So we have to consider, like, how are we posing? Are we posing from the images we see in videos? Are we posing from the images that we see in the magazines? Are we posing for men or women to look sexy and attractive? And yeah, so where is that? And we can thank Freshly Ground for their song, Potbelly.
Even though I have fat thighs, flabby arms, a pot belly still gives good loving. Fat thighs, flabby arms, a pot belly still gives good loving. Fat thighs, flabby arms, a pot belly still gives good loving. Well, I can't escape the thought that maybe we were destined to be together. The easy way we love pot belly still gives good loving. In another time, I could say I love you. I love you. And with your sweet hand in mine, I could say I need you. I need you every day and every hour. In the morning, in the evening time, he still gives good loving. After breakfast, after dinner time, he still gives good loving. Summer loving in the winter time, still gives good loving. Honey loving on the yours and mine.